South Korea is collapsing. It appears like one of the foremost progressed social orders within the world. But beneath the surface, there's a gigantic issue. The nation has the least ripeness rate universally of fair 0.72 in 2023. This implies that for each 100 ladies, there will be, as it were, 72 babies. The most youthful era is more than 60% littler than the past one, which is able to proceed to induce more regrettable exponentially. The most exceedingly bad thing about it all is that ripeness rates are only getting lower over time. As we'll go over in this video, this can be causing a few genuine inconvenience within the country. South Korean analysts are saying that this is often an existential emergency, since the country won't be the same decades from presently. To begin with of all, we ought to see at these statistic patterns in more detail. Within the past, South Korea utilized to have a booming populace similar to numerous other Asian countries. Back within the 1960s, each lady within the nation utilized to have 6 children on normal. But as you'll see on this chart, the richness rate fell like a brick. In 1983, a small over 20 a long time afterward, the fertility rate stood at fair 2.1. This is often called the substitution level, where the populace remains moderately steady. By this point, the fertility rate collapse slowed down, but it wasn't precisely gone. With ups and downs, it went from 2.1 to 1.5 to 1.2, and inevitably 2.7. In 2013, South Korea formally got the least ripeness rate within the world, a title that it holds to this day. As you'll be able to envision, it's not a title to be exceptionally glad of. Presently, it's not the as-it-were nation that's having richness rate issues. On the opposite, the larger part of nations, all-inclusive, have a richness rate underneath the substitution level, and rates have gone down all over the final decades. South Korea Fair happens to have the foremost extraordinary issues of them all. Strangely sufficient, these moo richness rates haven't had their impact on the country's populace estimate. Indeed, with the modern eras getting to be littler and littler, South Korea's populace has really developed over the past decades. There's, as it were, one clarification for this, and that's a maturing populace. You'll see this exceptionally clearly in South Korea's populace pyramid. Well, it's gathered to look something like a pyramid, but South Korea's one looks nothing like it. The bulk of South Korea's populace is within the age extent of 40 to 70, fundamentally the boomer and X generations. That's since the birth rates were moderately tall within the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Due to endless advancements in healthcare, individuals basically get more seasoned. However, the disparity between the ancient and youthful eras is colossal. For example, there are almost 800,000 South Koreans matured 60, but as it were, around 200,000 newborns. This lopsidedness makes entirety have of issues on its possess, as we'll go over afterward. Within the future, the genuine populace will inevitably start to recoil significantly. 2020 was the primary year with more deaths than births. COVID obviously helped this very a bit, but this population decline isn't progressing to moderate down. To get at this, we need to see at this chart. South Korea's add-up to populace has crested in 2020, and it's presently entering a moderate but relentless decrease over the coming a long time. As of now, the nation has 52 million people, which is anticipated to shrivel to just 36 million individuals 50 a long time from presently, or nearly 40%. On the off chance that we see genuine faraway absent to the conclusion of the 21st century, they're as it were planning to have 27 million individuals agreeing to the gauges. It's around half of the current populace. Much of the nation will end up forsaken. More than 1,000 little towns are as of now at chance of going terminated, and there will be more apparition towns in case this drift proceeds. So presently we get it that South Korea's populace is beginning to break down. Of course, a collapsing populace has gigantic results for all angles of society. You might think that having less individuals isn't that huge of an issue. More space and assets per individual appears like an incredible thing to have, but on the off chance that the populace collapse leads to a financial and social emergency, well, at that point it's obviously not so incredible, and usually precisely why individuals are calling it an existential emergency. 2. For a country actually at war, like South Korea, is right presently with North Korea. A populace collapse may be a tremendous hazard calculate. Surprisingly, there hasn't been an issue, however, when we see at the economy. South Korea has one of the foremost noteworthy economies within the world, with a GDP of $1.7 trillion in 2023. Sometime recently, the 2002s, the South Korean economy was on a tear, with development frequently within the twofold digits. It has kept up lovely strong development over the final 2 decades, with GDP development rates routinely over the 3% check. We may hypothesize that this lull in development should do with lower birth rates, but it might too fair be since South Korea has ended up a created nation. And 3% a year is way better than a few of the country's peers are doing. South Korea has outflanked its peer Japan, as it's set to surpass its eastern neighbor in terms of GDP per capita this year. But with an approaching populous collapse, this strong level of financial development may not be practical long term. To understand this, we have to be see at the working age populace of 15 to 64 a long time ancient. They are responsible for most of the utilization, and of course, they are the ones producing in salary. This bunch is getting to recoil indeed more drastically than the common populace since of a statistic move to the 65 and more seasoned category. Right presently, South Korea has 36 million working age individuals, which is anticipated to go down to fair 16,050,000 a long time from presently. Definitely, you listened that right, it's attending to more than half. Since of this, the country's economy might run into a divider. In the event that it has less than half the working populace, it should twofold salaries fair to preserve its measure, whereas usually more than achievable in 50, a long time due to advancements in tech. The genuine issue lies in universal competitiveness. There's a genuine chance that nations with more advantageous socioeconomics will get ahead of South Korea within the long term. Candidates are countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, or India. After all, strongly labor deficiencies aren't extraordinary for drawing in businesses and venture. On best of that, in case South Korea falls within the financial rankings, it's aiming to lose tons of its universal impact. The as it were reassurance for the government in Seoul is that other nations are too battling with birth rates, so it won't be the only one encountering a stagnation. On beat of that, the South Korean government has sufficient to stress around with the age reliance fiasco holding up to happen. There will be as well numerous elderly and not sufficient working age grown-ups within the nation. The most issues got to do with benefits and healthcare. Like numerous other nations, the government in South Korea has set up a pay-as-you-go annuity framework. Fundamentally, the individuals working presently are gathered to pay the cash for the individuals right now resign. It was set up this way in the 1980s, which was a tremendous botch in knowledge of the past. It works consistently in case there are less retirees than working individuals, since the working populace is able to bolster the retirees with fair a fraction of their wage. But right presently, the working populace is quickly contracting, and the 65 and more seasoned populace is rapidly developing. This appears within the age-old reliance proportion, which shows how numerous individuals there are to back the elderly. Back within the 1960s, there were about 20 individuals working for each retiree. In 2024, this number is down to 4. A small over a decade from presently, South Korea will as it were have 2 individuals to back each retiree. And around 2070, the number of elderlies anticipated to outperform the sum of working-age citizens. That may well be deplorable. How can fair one person pay for someone else's annuity? The South Korean government realized that this issue was bound to come back up when ripeness rates fell underneath the substitution level. That's why it made a national benefits finance to act as a buffer. Right presently, South Korea has $860 billion set aside in ventures to cover future annuities costs. This can be really the third biggest national speculation portfolio universally, which may be a lovely enormous bargain considering South Korea's estimate, but it won't be sufficient. By 2041, installments will begin to outpace commitments, and in 2055, the support is anticipated to be drained. The South Korean president promised to change the finance, but there are no beautiful arrangements. He'll either cut people's annuities or drive individuals to pay more commitments. Since of the political reality, there's also a chance that the issue gets deferred. Elderly individuals require a parcel of healthcare back, which is difficult to supply for in the event that there are not sufficient individuals to pay taxes and work in healing centers. The concerning portion is that the healthcare framework is as of now in the emergency right. A couple of months prior, South Korea conveyed armed force specialists to healing center crisis room. The insane portion is that this wasn't sense of an open well-being emergency like COVID. It's fair since there are as well numerous ancient individuals and not sufficient specialists. A few crisis rooms within the nation had to turn patients absent sense of these issues. A few doctors cautioned that the hospital crisis framework is at the skirt of collapse, in spite of the fact that the South Korean government denies this. Indeed, in the event that it's not, however, collapsing right presently, it seems exceptionally well do so within the future. We all know that the maturing weight is progressing to get numerous times more awful. When we're talking around weight on South Korean society, we ought to moreover specify North Korea. The two are technically countries at war since the Korean War from 1950 to 1953 finished in peace negotiation ascension. A peace arrangement was never really marked. Presently, you might inquire, what does this have to do with the populace collapse? Well, the best thing preventing an assault from the North Korean side could be a strong and respectable military. The statistic collapse might weaken this. In a range to keep its resistances in a range, the South Korean military needs a part of staff, which it is progressively battling to enlist. Right presently, the nation has 480,000 military workforce, the least number ever. In 50 years' time, the sum of individuals qualified for military benefit will have contracted by 58%. By 2038, the estimate of the country's outfitted powers will likely drop underneath the 400,000 check.